There are a ton of tablets on the market today, from Apple to Samsung, heck, even Amazon has a popular tablet lineup. This is an incredibly competitive field, and about a year ago, the iPad Air 4 hit the street. While it might not be the highest end, the flashiest, or the smallest iPad in all of the lineup, I personally think that over the past year, the Air 4 has no kidding shown itself to be the most solid of all the tablets in the iPad lineup, and I would call it a perfect tablet. So why is that? Let's find out. What's up, everyone? I'm the Everyday Dad, and if I can figure it out, you can figure it out. I think Apple has a fantastic lineup with all of their tablets, and it's really hard to recommend other options out there when you consider the breadth of their entire ecosystem. They've got options with legitimate desktop processors inside of them, tablets that can fit almost anywhere, and tablets that can be some of the best value computers that you can purchase. And the Air is really the one that I think is the most iPad of all the iPads. It's like the iPad 137 of the iPad multiverse. Get it? Quick note before we get too far into the video, no one provided me this iPad, not now, and not at any point while I've had one in my possession. I purchased this myself, and this is the one that I actually purchased for that original video over a year ago. As this is an X time later video and there haven't been any major game-breaking firmware updates for good or ill, this will be more of a refinement of my original thoughts and shouldn't contain anything that will shock you for like news. First up, since it's been a while since we've talked about the iPad Air, let's quickly cover the specs and ordering options if you do want to buy one of these yourself. The base model iPad Air will cost you $599. For that money, you'll get the option of 5 separate colors: sky blue, green, rose gold, silver, and space gray. You'll get the older but gooder A14 processor, 64 gigabytes of storage, and a Wi-Fi connection. You can get another level up for 256 gigabytes of storage, which will increase that price to $749. Now, I don't think that's that good of a choice. I think the benefit of the iPad Air is that $599 price tag, but if you do, there it is. And if you want to be a little freer and not tied down, you can get a cellular connection for about $120 on top of those other two models. Now, it's not 5G, but it's pretty good. All right, so let's get into what I've liked and what I've disliked over that past year and why I consider this to be a perfect tablet. Maybe not the perfect tablet, but at least a perfect tablet. And because I've liked this thing so much, let's start off with the things that I've enjoyed. The first thing I've liked is the completeness of this package. Obviously, we'll talk more about some of these things in specific shortly, but the real magic of the iPad Air is how it does everything in the iPad lineup, but for like half the price of some of the more expensive options. You get the keyboard connections, you get the laminated display, you get the power, you get the USB-C. It's such a fantastic overall package. When you think about it, almost every other iPad is missing something, but there isn't really anything missing here. After using the rest of the lineup over the past year, and look, I've been very impressed with some of the other iPads, each has a legitimate problem or is missing something. And while the Air isn't wholly perfect, I mean, we will talk about things that I haven't liked later, it's the closest you can get to enjoying the whole buffet of what an iPad can actually do. And in specifics, I continue to really like the Magic Keyboard and how you can use it with the iPad Air. This is not a small upgrade or a small accessory. Well, physically, it's kind of small, I guess. But basically, it changes the iPad from a content consumption device or something that could only really be used for light browsing and maybe email monitoring, and it turns it into an actual work machine. It's not a laptop, and no, I still don't think even the expensive iPads have fully turned into computers. So while it's not a laptop, it's something else entirely. And I think that thing is the best of both worlds. Quick touchscreen operation, but it also has confident and consistent typing. And lest we forget, it has a better trackpad than most actual laptops. The iPad Pro does have the ability to be a larger tablet and use the larger 12.9-inch keyboard, but I think the sweet spot for iPads is the 11-inch keyboard that the Air 4 uses. It's smaller and more nimble than a MacBook, and it's roughly the size of a paper notebook. That's the key feature and the key advantage of this specific combination. You get that bigger option, and you are now talking bigger, heavier, and more expensive than a MacBook Air. Sure, the MacBook is missing a touchscreen, but now we've started complicating the discussions, and if I could only pick one, I would absolutely pick the MacBook over the bigger iPad. Plus, it's how easy you can switch between the two sort of modes that really brings home how useful the keyboard is. Look at this. It's one way, it's the other way. Takes seconds. If it was a hassle to set up, nobody would want to use it, and I certainly wouldn't recommend it. The keyboard is expensive, but I think the combination of the two items is absolutely better than the sum of its parts. The next thing I've continued to like is the power. Yes, the newer iPads have that brand new A15 processor inside of them, or the M1 processor inside of them, and those are objectively faster chips. But it's a tablet. Like seriously, who cares about the Cinebench or the specific benchmark scores? What I care about is smoothness of operation, longevity, and overall battery life. And the iPad Air has really delivered on all of those fronts. While it doesn't have the ultra smooth display performance that you would get from the iPad Pro and its Pro Motion display technology, the 60Hz refresh rate here combined with the smoothness of iPad OS, it really feels seamless. What is cool though, if you need some oomph, the A14 is a surprisingly capable little chip. You can see that when we used it for 4K video editing, it's able to handle and process those monster files faster than some actual computers. Plus, if you look at the current iPads that get the latest and greatest updates, you can see here that even the old iPad Air 2 and the iPad 5th generation are still able to get the newest iPad OS 15. That iPad Air 2 was released back in 2014. 7 years is like an eternity in technology years. Like 7 years ago, these were like dinosaurs roaming the earth. I can't promise that the iPad Air 4 will get 7 years of operating systems, but I can say it will probably get updates far longer than any of its competition. The next thing I've continued to like is the size. Yes, we mentioned this already a little bit when we talked about the keyboard, but I would like to expand on that. The reason this iPad works as well as it does is because it's big enough to be different and more usable than my iPhone when needed, but it's also smaller than my MacBook, but still usable enough if needed. The 11-inch iPad Air really threads that needle almost perfectly, giving you not only an actually useful device, but one that's different enough to justify purchasing it. If it was as small as my iPhone, well, why not just use the iPhone? And if it was as big as my MacBook, well, why not just use the MacBook? iPads are these very unique hybrids, and they need to have that hybrid approach in all aspects to really hit their peak usability. And whoo, fam, let me tell you, the iPad Air 4 smashes it out of the park. I've also continued to really like the fully laminated display here. Yes, it's not that big of a difference compared to the iPad Generation 9, but I do prefer having the display and the glass covering it to be the same physical object. The battery life is also pretty good. It's not earth-shattering, and it's nowhere near as good as the magic that is the M1 MacBooks, but it will get through a full day of iPad use. And I say iPad use because much like I don't consider it a laptop, I don't use it like a laptop either. This will rarely just be on going through a whole day. I mean, that's how I use my MacBook, but the iPad is more of a do something, okay, pause, it goes to sleep, then you turn it on later. It's a stop and start device. Look, those MacBooks have really skewed my world when it comes to battery life. Like nothing else compares when you have those huge outliers on the graph. Like graphs are not my strong suit. All I see is that huge numbers out there. Thanks, Apple. And the last thing that I like to mention on the things that I've continued to like is just the modularity of the iPad Air. Like the size, iPads for me are all about the accessories and being able to build them into whatever you want. The iPad Air is really the iPad that works with the most amount of accessories. We've already talked about the keyboard, but it's more than just that. There are other keyboard options out there that you can get if you don't like the Apple offerings. You can get cases, dongles, protectors, stands, all sorts of things. This is basically like a little Lego building block that you can turn into whatever you need it to be. And I think that gets overlooked all of the time when we talk about iPads. Sure, there are accessories for the bigger and smaller ones, but those are more unique bodies, and there will not be nearly as many options as this, like the standard iPad shape. It's like the Swiss Army knife of tablet platforms for accessory makers, and that's absolutely a huge factor in this being like a perfect tablet. Okay, we did have perfect with a question mark in the title, meaning it's not actually perfect, because frankly, nothing is. So what are the things that I haven't liked, even though I spent the preceding part of this video talking about the tablet like it can walk on water? The first thing I don't like isn't really the tablet's fault, because this came out before Apple updated the front-facing cameras on all of their future iPads. This one has the older, tighter framed front-facing camera that does not have Apple Center Stage built into it. I love that new ultra-wide camera that Apple's put on the iPad mini, the iPad Generation 9, and the iPad Pros. It's the single most useful teleconferencing camera that I've seen on a mobile device, and as somebody that spends the majority of their time in teleconferences, that's pretty important to me. I was going back and forth on including this in the video because it's not like Apple held this back from the iPad Air 4, it's that it didn't exist until after the iPad was released. However, I would very much like to see this on future iPad Airs because it's just so good. Because it's missing here is like the key reason that I've been recommending the iPad Generation 9 so much since that was released. It's like the best option for somebody looking for a budget collaboration tool. An iPad Air 5 with that camera would steal the crown away so fast from the iPad Generation 9. The only other thing that I consistently have not liked is the Touch ID sensor. I get it, Apple engineers wanted to keep some method of biometric authentication on the iPad Air, and since Face ID seems to be reserved for the pros, they needed to figure figure out a way to get Touch ID onto here. It is functional. When I tap my finger onto the lock button housing that sensor, the tablet will unlock with it, or it will verify my password or my purchase. But where it is makes it kind of a pain to use, and it just ends up being faster to type in my PIN or type in my password instead of totally disrupting the flow of whatever I'm doing just to hit that button. Personally, I think we need to either figure out a way to get Touch ID back onto the front of the tablet, or maybe even the top along here, or just get rid of it entirely and have Face ID on everything. Look, I get it. That's kind of a shocking thing to say coming from Mr. Touch ID, the everyday dad. But them's the breaks. But at the end of the day, so what, right? No kidding, even more than a year later, I still think the iPad Air 4 is the most complete, possibly perfect tablet that you can buy. It's got most of the strengths of the rest of the iPads without very many of their weaknesses. It's priced well, can work with a ton of accessories, and can fit in any backpack or even a large handbag. This is a great complement to a phone or computer, and it's just amazing. I will continue to recommend this because it delivers on the promise of what an iPad is supposed to be, and it can even blur the line between mobile devices and computers. But what about you? Are you still using an iPad Air? Are you considering buying an iPad Air? Or have you moved on to one of the Pros or maybe the iPad Mini? Let me know in the comments below because I would love to hear your take. And if you like this video and you would like to see what I consider to be the most functional Apple ecosystem that you can buy, good news. I made that video and I'm gonna put it right here and you can just click on it. Click right here. Click, 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 click. Thanks for watching.